Chloe had always dreamed of a wedding filled with love, surrounded by friends and family, but today, everything felt like a prison. The moment she stepped into the church, she saw the whispers and the judging eyes, as if everyone already knew what she had done. Her heart raced, her skin felt too tight. It was supposed to be her day, the one moment to prove that love could overcome everything. But she couldn't. Not when his eyes met hers, full of guilt and lies. She wanted to scream, to run, but instead, she swallowed her pain and took another step forward, as if walking toward a fate already written for her. Chloe had never felt more alone, not even as the doors closed behind her, sealing her into a future she didn't choose. Every breath was a struggle, every step heavier. She didn't even notice the car door swing open, offering her escape, just as she ran past it. Without thinking, she climbed inside. Chloe sat still in the back seat, her breath slow and shaky. The weight of the wedding gown pressed against her, the fabric like a shackle reminding her of the life she had just left behind. She didn't know why she had gotten in this car, didn't know why she wasn't running from it all. Her mind raced, questioning everything she thought she wanted. Darren had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. The image of his face, his hands trembling as he held that ring, haunted her. Could she ever go back to him? Would her heart ever be able to forgive him for the lies? But then there was the stranger beside her. He was quiet, his presence looming like a storm, yet there was something oddly comforting in his silence. Chloe didn't know his name, didn't even know why he'd stopped, but the fact that he had offered her an escape from the wreckage of her life felt strangely freeing. She closed her eyes, not knowing what to expect next but unable to stop the whirlwind inside her. As the car sped through the city, Chloe couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into something she couldn't control. The man beside her remained silent, but his presence seemed to speak volumes. It was like he could sense the storm inside her, yet he never pushed for answers. She glanced at him, her eyes tracing the sharp lines of his face, wondering who he was and why he was here. It felt wrong to even be sitting next to him. She had no plan, no destination. The thought of running had crossed her mind 100 times, but where would she go? She didn't have any family close by, no friends who could understand the pain she was in. Chloe had spent so many years building walls around herself, never allowing anyone to get too close. But now, sitting in this stranger's car, she felt the walls crumbling bit by bit. She didn't know if it was the emotional exhaustion or the comfort of the unfamiliar, but for the first time in a long while, Chloe wasn't sure if she was scared of what was coming next or hopeful for the change it promised. The silence stretched between them, heavy and unspoken. Chloe felt like she should say something, anything, but the words felt stuck in her throat. She wanted to ask him why he had stopped, why he had taken her in when he knew nothing about her, but the question never left her lips. Instead, she simply stared at him, studying the faint lines on his face, the tightness around his eyes that suggested he was holding back something. Perhaps he too was hiding behind the silence. Maybe he was trying to figure out what to do with her, just like she was trying to figure out what to do with herself. Her wedding had turned into a nightmare, a scene she would never be able to forget, and now she was stuck in the backseat of a stranger's car, on a path she hadn't chosen but was now following blindly. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but it was better than staying in that church, pretending to be something she wasn't. Chloe's eyes drift toward the window, the lights of the city outside blending into a sea of colors. She could feel the pull of the night, of something unknown and dangerous, but she wasn't ready to confront it. Not yet. For now, the car felt like the only safe place, a temporary haven where she didn't have to explain herself. Her thoughts returned to Darren, to the betrayal she couldn't erase. She tried to push the image of his face out of her mind, but it was impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, there he was, holding that ring, offering her a future she couldn't trust. Chloe turned to look at the man beside her again. She couldn't understand why he was here, what he wanted from her. But there was something about the way he remained silent, the way he didn't ask questions, that made her feel oddly safe. In this strange, twisted moment, Chloe realized she might not be as alone as she thought. Maybe this car ride was the beginning of something she hadn't expected, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Chloe couldn't sleep. The bed, cold and unfamiliar, felt like a cage instead of a refuge. Every creak of the floorboards, every passing car outside, reminded her of the life she had abandoned. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Darren, his face, his lies, the way he had betrayed her trust. She closed her eyes but couldn't escape the memories. She was supposed to have a future with him, a future that now felt like a distant dream. The stranger who had given her an escape was still a mystery. His silence, though comforting at times, now felt like a barrier, keeping her from understanding why he was here and what he expected from her. But in the quiet of the night, Chloe realized one thing: she couldn't go back. Her old life was gone, and the future seemed both terrifying and liberating. Morning came too soon, and Chloe awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside the apartment. The sunlight broke through the curtains, but it offered no warmth. The world outside seemed to keep moving, while she felt stuck in time, lost between what had been and what was yet to come. She rose from the bed, the weight of her gown still heavy on her body. It was a constant reminder of the life she had walked away from. She had no idea what to do now, or where to go. The man who had given her a ride remained in the other room, silently watching over her. His quiet presence both unsettled and comforted her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking down a path she couldn't control. Chloe walked into the small kitchen, hoping to distract herself from the swirling thoughts that had kept her up all night. The man was sitting at the small table, sipping a cup of coffee. He had a calm demeanor, his dark eyes focused on the cup in front of him. For a moment, Chloe considered asking him why he had helped her, why he hadn't just left her to deal with her own mess. But the words didn't come. Instead, she moved toward the counter, the silence between them growing heavier. She didn't know this man, but something in his quiet strength made her feel a little less alone. She filled a mug with coffee, her hand shaking slightly. The tension in the air was palpable, but Chloe didn't know how to break it. Chloe sat down across from the man, her fingers wrapped around the mug. The coffee, though warm, did little to ease the coldness that had settled in her chest. She wanted to ask him about his life, why he had been so willing to help a stranger, but she couldn't find the words. The silence between them stretched on, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they both understood that this moment needed no words. Chloe didn't know what the future held, but something about this man, this quiet space, made her feel as though maybe, just maybe, she could find a way forward. The world outside still felt distant, but for a brief moment, Chloe allowed herself to breathe. Chloe knew she couldn't stay in this limbo forever. She needed to make a choice, to take control of her own future. The man's silence had started to feel like an invitation, a way for her to figure things out without judgment. She had no idea where this strange journey would lead, but for the first time in days, Chloe felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was something more to her story than the broken pieces of her past. She looked up at the man, who had remained still through it all, and for the first time, she spoke the question that had been lingering in her mind. "What do you want from me?" Her voice trembled slightly, but it was steady enough to signal that she was finally ready to take control of her fate. The quiet between Chloe and the man had started to crack. She had asked her question, and though he hadn't answered, she felt the walls closing in. Chloe couldn't escape the sense that her choices were narrowing, and the pressure of his silence was unbearable. She knew she had to make a decision, leave or stay, but her heart was in conflict. The memories of Darren haunted her at every turn, and with each passing day, Chloe found herself sinking deeper into the uncertainty. The stranger's presence was like a quiet force, urging her forward into the unknown. She wasn't ready for what lay ahead, but the weight of her past held her back. Chloe knew she couldn't ignore the tension any longer. She stood up, pacing the room, her mind racing. "Why won't you say anything?" she asked, turning toward him. "I don't know what you want from me. I'm just trying to figure out what comes next." The man didn't respond immediately, his gaze never leaving her. Chloe's breath quickened as she continued, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't even know who you are, but you're the only person who seems to care. Why?" She stopped in her tracks, staring at him, waiting for him to give her some answers. His silence was maddening, but Chloe was tired of running from it. She needed clarity. The silence stretched on. Chloe felt her pulse racing, her heart pounding in her chest. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The man's eyes softened, and for the first time, Chloe saw a flicker of something in his gaze. Concern, maybe, or maybe understanding. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "You didn't have to ask for anything. You're here because you needed help." Chloe paused, the weight of his words settling over her. She wanted to push back, to argue, but she found herself too exhausted to fight anymore. Instead, she sank back into the couch, the tension in her body loosening for the first time in days. Chloe turned to face him fully, searching for any hint of what he wanted. "But why me?" she asked, her voice shaky but more forceful now. "You barely know me. Why help someone like me?" The man didn't answer immediately. He stood there, seemingly weighing his response before finally speaking. "Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. Even you." Chloe's chest tightened. The idea of starting over felt like a distant dream, one she wasn't sure she was ready for. She had spent so long keeping herself together, hiding her pain, but now she was being offered something she didn't know how to accept. A second chance. Chloe couldn't believe what she was hearing. A second chance. How could that even be possible? "You think I can just leave all this behind?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I have nothing left, nothing but this broken heart." The man stepped closer, his presence steady and grounded. "You can't move forward while holding on to the past." Chloe swallowed, her eyes welling up with tears. She wanted to argue, to hold on to her pain, but she knew deep down that he was right. She had to let go. But how? Her life had been built on a foundation of pain, and now she had to figure out how to rebuild it, piece by piece. Chloe stood in front of the mirror, staring at the woman who barely resembled herself. The woman in the reflection wore the wedding gown she had once thought would mark the happiest day of her life, but now, it seemed like a symbol of everything she had lost. She had walked away from the church, from Darren, but the echoes of that day were still with her, lingering in her mind. The stranger beside her had been patient, but patience couldn't heal a heart torn by betrayal. Chloe felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, unable to decide whether to leap into the unknown or retreat into the safety of what was familiar but broken. "What do I do now?" she whispered, as if asking her reflection for answers. The silence answered her question with a painful truth. She couldn't stay where she was, but she wasn't ready to move forward either. Chloe's mind was in a frenzy, the weight of her past and the uncertainty of her future battling for dominance. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had done, every choice she had made, had led her to this point. The stranger who had quietly offered her an escape now felt like the only person who might understand. But he remained a mystery, his silence more deafening than any words he could say. "What do you want from me?" Chloe finally asked, her voice shaking with both frustration and desperation. He had offered her a chance at something new, but Chloe still couldn't figure out what it was or why he had chosen her. He didn't speak immediately, but his gaze softened as he took a step closer. The world outside seemed so far away, but here, in this small space, Chloe felt the walls closing in. The stranger finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "I never wanted anything from you," he said, his gaze steady, but his words heavy with an unspoken meaning. "I'm here because you needed someone. I saw that." Chloe's breath caught in her throat as she processed his words. He wasn't asking for anything. He had just seen her pain and stepped in. For a brief moment, Chloe felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: trust. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I don't know what to do," Chloe whispered, her voice small but filled with a strange hope. "I don't know how to move on." The man stepped closer, his presence grounding her in the moment. "One step at a time," he said softly. "You don't have to have it all figured out now." Chloe nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle over her like a blanket. The future was still unknown, but for the first time, Chloe didn't feel entirely alone. As the days passed, Chloe began to realize that she wasn't just healing from the betrayal of Darren. She was starting to heal from the wounds she had carried with her for so long, wounds that had nothing to do with the man who had hurt her, but everything to do with her own fears and insecurities. The man in her life had never pushed her to confront them, but his presence was a quiet invitation to do so. Chloe didn't know what the future held, but she knew she had to keep moving forward. She had walked away from a life she thought she wanted, but in doing so, she had unknowingly walked towards something else, a chance to rediscover who she was without the weight of her past defining her. She wasn't sure she could let go completely, but she knew she had to try. For the first time in years, Chloe took a deep breath, a breath that felt like the beginning of something new. Chloe stepped into the unknown with more confidence than she had ever felt before. She wasn't sure where she was going, but she knew she wasn't running anymore. The stranger, whose presence had been both a mystery and a comfort, had become someone she could rely on, even if she still didn't know everything about him. But it didn't matter anymore. She was no longer afraid to take control of her own fate. Chloe knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be moments when she questioned herself. But for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that she could rebuild from the ashes of her past. Chloe had spent the past few weeks trying to rebuild her life, piece by piece. It hadn't been easy. Memories of Darren haunted her, but they no longer defined her. Every day brought new challenges, but with each challenge, Chloe felt stronger. She had started to take control of her future, something she had never done before. The man, who had quietly remained by her side, had become her anchor in this new world she was navigating. Yet, despite the growing comfort between them, Chloe knew she still had questions. About him. About herself. There was still so much left unsaid, but perhaps now wasn't the time to ask. She had learned to trust the process, trust the journey she was on. As she stood looking at the city skyline from her small apartment, Chloe knew the road ahead wasn't clear. But for the first time in her life, she was okay with that. "I'm not running anymore," she whispered to herself. She was ready for whatever came next. Chloe had made peace with the uncertainty of her future, but the man beside her still remained a puzzle. He had shown her kindness, a steady presence, but he never asked for anything in return. She had come to appreciate his quiet nature, his ability to simply be without the pressure of words. But Chloe knew that silence, no matter how comforting, couldn't last forever. As she sat with him at the table, sipping coffee, she felt an unfamiliar urge to know more about him. "You've always been here," Chloe began, her voice calm but filled with curiosity. "But I still don't know anything about you. Who are you?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of everything left unsaid. The man set his coffee cup down and looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I'm someone who's been where you are," he said, his voice low but honest. Someone who needed a chance to start over too. Chloe's questions about the man lingered, but she didn't press him. She had learned to let things unfold at their own pace. That was what the past few weeks had taught her. The importance of patience, the ability to sit in the discomfort of not knowing. But, even with the unanswered questions, Chloe couldn't deny the connection she felt. Something in the way he looked at her, something in the silence they shared, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced in a long time. "I don't know where this is going," she confessed quietly, her voice softer than before. "But for the first time, I'm not afraid to find out." The man's gaze softened, and for the first time he smiled, just a small, quiet smile. But it was enough to reassure Chloe that she wasn't alone in this. Maybe he was just as uncertain as she was, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were both willing to walk through this together. As time passed, Chloe's life continued to evolve. She found a job, began meeting new people, and slowly started to put together a new version of herself. It wasn't perfect, and there were days when the weight of her past still threatened to pull her under, but Chloe was learning to rise above it. The man remained a constant in her life, his quiet presence always offering her a sense of stability. But as the days turned into weeks, Chloe began to wonder if there was more between them than just mutual understanding. One evening, as they sat on the balcony, the city stretching out before them, Chloe finally asked, "What happens now? Where do we go from here?" The man looked out at the horizon before turning to her. "Wherever you want to go, Chloe," he replied softly. "I'm not here to lead you, I'm here to walk beside you. The simplicity of his answer hit Chloe like a wave. For the first time she realized that she wasn't just existing anymore, she was living. And whatever came next, she knew she could face it. Chloe had come so far from the woman who had once stood at the altar, trapped by her past, and overwhelmed by the weight of expectations. She had stepped into the unknown, and now, she was carving out a life that was truly hers. There would always be remnants of the pain she had left behind, but Chloe knew she could handle it. She had strength now, strength born from the quiet resilience she had found within herself. And maybe, just maybe, that strength had come from the quiet man who had never pushed her, but had always been there, offering her the one thing she had needed most, the freedom to heal in her own time. I don't know what the future holds, Chloe whispered to him one evening, her voice steady and sure. But I know I'm ready for it. The man nodded, his presence steady beside her. You always have been, he said, his voice low and warm. And for the first time, Chloe believed him. Chloe woke to the sound of the city beginning its day. The sun was already climbing into the sky, casting golden light across her room. She had started to sleep better in recent weeks, a peace settling over her that she hadn't known in years. But even as the weight of her past seemed to lift, there were moments, quiet moments, when it all rushed back. Darren's face, his betrayal, the altar she had walked away from. They still haunted her, but now, they didn't control her. The morning light felt different now, full of promise. Maybe that's what it is, Chloe thought, as she stood up from bed, stretching and letting the sunlight pour over her. Maybe moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It just means learning to live with the past. She turned toward the window, a quiet sense of clarity filling her chest. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into that church, lost in the weight of expectations. She had rebuilt herself, piece by piece, and while the future was still uncertain, she no longer feared it. Chloe smiled to herself. She was finally ready to embrace it. Chloe had started to carve out a life for herself, one she could be proud of. She had returned to work, picked up hobbies she had forgotten, and even started making new friends. But as she moved forward, she couldn't help but feel the pull of her past, of the man who had taken her away from the church that day, of the silence that had bound them together. He was a mystery, and although she had come to appreciate his presence, Chloe felt it was time to confront it. She needed to know who he really was, what he wanted, and why he had been there for her when no one else had. One evening, after dinner, she turned to him. You've never asked me for anything, but I need to ask you something, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. Who are you? And why have you been here all this time? The man looked at her, his expression unreadable, before he finally spoke. I'm someone who understands what it's like to need a second chance, he said quietly. And I've been here because I see you, Chloe. I see who you are, and I'm not asking for anything in return. I'm here because you needed someone to walk beside you. Chloe absorbed his words, feeling a sense of understanding she hadn't expected. His honesty was disarming, and for the first time, Chloe felt the walls between them begin to fall. The man's words echoed in Chloe's mind long after he had left the room. I see you. No one had ever said that to her before, not in the way he had. It wasn't just about her looks or the way she carried herself. It was as though he saw the parts of her she had hidden away for so long, the parts she didn't even know how to name. The pieces of her heart that she had buried under layers of disappointment, betrayal, and fear. Chloe stood up and walked to the window, staring at the world outside. She was no longer trapped in the past. She was no longer chained to the life that Darren had tried to force upon her. The man had shown her what it meant to be seen, and now, for the first time in a long while, Chloe allowed herself to see her own worth. I can't keep living like I'm still broken, she whispered to herself. I have to believe that I deserve something more. As Chloe and the man sat together one evening, the air between them was different, more comfortable, yet charged with something Chloe couldn't quite place. After weeks of unspoken understanding, the silence between them had evolved. Chloe felt ready to ask the question that had lingered in her heart for so long. What's next for us? She asked softly. Where do we go from here? The man looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady, and for the first time there was something more in his eyes, something that felt like a promise. "Wherever you want to go, Chloe," he replied, his voice calm but filled with an unspoken certainty. "I'll be here no matter what." Chloe felt something shift inside her. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but for the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to have all the answers. She was okay with the uncertainty, with the not knowing. The only thing that mattered was that she was no longer alone in it. And that, somehow, was enough. The days that followed were quieter, more peaceful. Chloe had begun to step into the life she had been too afraid to claim. The man remained a constant, never rushing her, always allowing her the space to grow at her own pace. Chloe had learned that moving forward didn't mean forgetting. It meant understanding that the past had shaped her, but it didn't have to define her. She no longer lived in fear of the unknown, no longer avoided the pain. She had learned to live with it, to let it become a part of her story without letting it hold her hostage. One evening, as Chloe sat in the kitchen, sipping her coffee, she looked across at the man. "I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice firm with newfound strength. "I'm ready to start over." He smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride and understanding. "Then we'll take it one step at a time," he said softly, his words carrying more meaning than he could know. Chloe nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her heart. For the first time she truly believed it. This was just the beginning. Chloe stood at the edge of the park, looking out at the sprawling landscape before her. The trees were in full bloom, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, the world feeling alive with possibility. She had started taking walks here every morning, grounding herself in the simple rhythm of nature. It was a way for her to start each day anew, to find peace amidst the chaos of the world. But today, something felt different. A shift in the air, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Chloe took a deep inhale, her chest rising as she filled her lungs with the fresh morning air. There was something about this place that made her feel like she could finally let go of everything she had been holding on to, her fears, her past, the confusion. With each step, the weight she had carried for so long seemed lighter. Maybe this is the moment, she thought, her thoughts quiet but certain. Maybe this is where it all begins. Chloe closed her eyes for a brief moment, allowing the wind to brush against her skin, a quiet smile forming on her lips. She was ready. Chloe had been taking things one day at a time, but there was a part of her that still longed for more clarity. She had come so far, but she wasn't sure if the man by her side would be in her future. He had been patient, never rushing her, never demanding more than she was ready to give. But as their time together grew, Chloe began to realize that the unspoken tension between them wasn't something that could remain indefinitely. One evening, as they sat together on the couch, Chloe turned to him, her voice quiet but filled with a quiet urgency. "I need to know," she said, her gaze steady. "What do we do now? Where are we going?" The man looked at her for a long time, his expression calm but unreadable. "Wherever you need to go, Chloe," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll be here. I've never wanted anything more than to see you find your peace." His words hit her like a soft wave, not because they were earth-shattering, but because they were exactly what she needed to hear. She didn't need grand gestures. She needed honesty. And for the first time, Chloe felt a deep sense of relief. She didn't have to have it all figured out. She was still moving forward. The next morning, Chloe woke with a newfound sense of clarity. The conversation from the night before echoed in her mind, but this time, the uncertainty didn't feel as heavy. She had made peace with the fact that the future wasn't something she could control, but she could navigate it with a sense of trust. The man hadn't given her all the answers, but he had given her something more important, the space to find her own. Chloe stood in front of the mirror that morning, looking at her reflection. She saw a woman who had weathered storms, who had walked away from a future she thought she wanted, and who was now learning to carve out a new one. "I am enough," she whispered to herself, a quiet affirmation she had never given herself before. The weight in her chest had lightened. She was finally free to make her own choices, no longer burdened by the past. The woman she saw in the mirror smiled back, a woman ready to face whatever came next. Chloe spent the next few days in a quiet state of reflection, wondering what it would feel like to finally choose her life, without the weight of past mistakes or regrets clouding her decisions. She had always been so afraid of being alone, but now, she realized that she was never truly alone. She had found strength in herself that she had never known existed. She had let go of the expectations others had placed on her, and had learned to trust her instincts. And as she stood outside one afternoon, looking out at the familiar city streets, she realized that she was ready to live for herself, not for anyone else. "This is my life," she thought, her chest swelling with a new sense of self. "And I am going to live it fully, without fear." The days continued to pass, and with each one, Chloe found herself moving forward, not in a grand dramatic way, but in small, meaningful steps. She had begun to open up to others again, allowing herself to be vulnerable, to let people in. It was a slow process, but it was progress. And every evening as the man stood beside her, offering his quiet support, Chloe couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. He had been there for her when she didn't know how to be there for herself. But now, she knew she was capable of standing on her own. One evening, as they sat together, the man turned to her. "You've come so far, Chloe," he said softly. "You've changed in ways I never thought possible." Chloe smiled, feeling the weight of his words sink in. "I'm still changing," she replied, her voice calm but filled with certainty. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next."